And it ends like it nicely faded out and everything. So that was the first time I watched that video. I was kind of intrigued, like, when is it going to end? But I am Jeff Fuller from Fuller Embroidery Works, and that is Justin Armenta from JA Digitizing Studios. We are both here for the Embroidery Nerd, and today we are going to be talking about applique, but like actually talking about applique instead of like last week where we were just kind of almost talking about applique. Somewhat talking about applique. But let's go ahead and we'll check in with the people that are watching with us. So we have Cindy King. Good evening. Cindy was actually here before the live started, so she gets first comment award of the day. We have Barb here saying hi all from North Central Minnesota. I know where that is. It's slightly above me and very cold. So if you are in the comments and you do have questions, feel free to ask them in the comments and we will answer them the best that we can. We also have Letty here. Hey, guys. So, Justin, applique. Let's talk about applique.
Yeah. Let's talk.
Go ahead. Throw you under the bus. No. So today we picked a graphic that was from a vector site that I have a paid subscription to, so that I could get the rights for it. And we're going to be talking a little bit about applique, the steps that go into applique and digitizing for applique.
Correct.
And correct me if I'm missing anything. I'm going to like stop talking for a little bit.
So I guess the first thing would be to decide if you're going to be doing in the hoop or pre-cut material, what type of material. So those are a couple of the pre-steps that you really need to decide on when you're going to do an applique project.
So I think maybe the very first thing that we should decide on is whether or not we're going to do an applique project.
Right. Yeah, it lends well to applique, correct.
Yeah. So for me, a good candidate for applique is anything with a large fill. And by large fill, I mean 2-3 inches. You know, you start getting up into the bigger sizes. I don't know if you have any other requirements that you look at, Justin.
Yeah, it's typically the size. I mean, applique is going to be, there's two reasons to use applique. You're either going to want to save on stitch count. So you're going to use the material to fill that large area, or you're just looking for that different type of look where the material is a different sheen or a different pattern as the thread that you're using. So yeah, getting into really small logos with applique, it almost adds a lot more work and a little bit more difficulty trying to get that pattern to cut out for one thing or sew properly, and it's really not worth it to me. When you're looking at just small little fill areas, you might as well just use, a fill stitch or a motif or something like that.
The only other thing I'll throw in there that I look at too is if it's really contrasting colors. So if you have like fire engine red shirt and you're trying to throw a white logo down on top of it, that's, you're either going to really have to crank up your density to be able to get the coverage that you need, or you can look at putting something under that fill. But we do have a question here from Cindy. What is y'all's difference between applique and tackle twill? I am from the world of tackle twill.
So the way I learned it is tackle twill is more of like what you see on uniforms, where typically the twill is going to be pre-cut, usually laser cut, and that way you have pretty accurate cuts in corners and whatnot. And the tackle twill is where the edge is just sewn on using just a zigzag stitch. Applique is typically done where the material could either be in the hoop cut or cut or pre-cut, but it's usually finished in satin stitches and in, I don't know, I guess you do a lot more with applique as far as design wise. When tackle twill, like I said, is numbers or team names or something like that, where it's multi-layered sometimes, pre-cut, more accurate with just a zigzag stitch at the very end. And typically it's pressed afterwards as well, heat pressed to get the twill, pressure sensitive twill, to adhere.
So that's where I was going to say too is typically with tackle twill, it's got a heat applied backing already to it, where applique is, it's like a quilter's cotton or pretty much any fabric you have around, which I know some people like to fuse something onto the back of it to help keep it from fraying, and other people like to just throw down the fabric and cut and go. But a lot of the times, like you said, tackle twill is either, I've heard it called a raw edge applique versus a covered applique.
Right.
So you run into those little differences. We have Eric here saying, I have used it in small areas on textured garments or with pre-stitched decoration on light garments. So like a patch with the edge as an attachment cover. I think we've been seeing a lot of that. I've been seeing a lot more of that on like beanies this winter. Typically people want to do direct embroidery, and now it's, sublimated patches that they're looking for the attachment file to hold it down onto a hat or just to cover the edge there. So,
right.
I do have the design up. I don't know if you do yet or not, Justin.
I don't yet.
All right, so I'll go ahead and share my screen, and let me zoom in here just a little bit to that, and we'll go ahead and share my screen. Add to stream, and there we go. So the first thing I brought up here is we have some applique tools for digitizing applique in Willcom. But not everybody has applique tools, and so I just wanted to go over some of the different arrangements of stitches that people use for like placement, cut line, tack down. So with applique, you can have either cut in the hoop or you can have pre-cut shapes. A lot of the times, and for instance, in this software, when I'm digitizing it, it gives me the option of in the hoop or not in the hoop. And really it's based off of generating one extra stitch. So if I come in here, right here, this one, you have your placement stitch, which shows you where to put the fabric or the twill. This stitch here is the cut line. So I've separated these out, but this one here is the cut line. This is where it kind of just lightly holds down the material, and you try to cut as close to that line as you can. And in Willcom, it does this fancy little stitch. I don't know what it's called, but it's not quite a zigzag. And that's your tack down stitch that holds down the fabric for, of course, the cover stitch. And here you can see that we're basically just missing the cut line that you would need to cut against. So this one, you get your placement and you take your pre-cut piece of material and you would set it down, and then you would go ahead and do the tack down. And that I have seen people do, like if their software doesn't have this, they'll duplicate their placement stitch and use that as their tack down stitch. Some of the different ways that I've seen applique held down is, of course, if you're going to do like a raw edge where it's a little bit, like you said, sports number, where it's a light zigzag that goes around and holds it down. I've also seen, this is called, I forget what they call it in here, an E-stitch. I've also heard of it called as a blanket stitch. That's another one where if you're going to do like a raw edge, it'll hold it down. And same here with this kind of square stitch. And you can even do it with like motifs. But if you have a material that's not going to fray, like tackle twill with a heat backing on it, there are some manufacturers of fusible items that you can put onto the back of regular fabric that's going to stop it from fraying, so that you can do more of a raw edge applique if you want. It gives you a different look. But traditionally, when somebody says to me, I want an applique, I think, okay, it's going to be a placement, a tack down, and a satin stitch cover. Those are the three places that my mind instantly goes. And unless if they tell me I'm going to be cutting it in the hoop, I'm going to assume that they're going to have pre-cut letters. And that's me personally. I don't know about you, Justin. I always just assume that they're going to have pre-cut.
I more than not deal with the customers I deal with that have applique, they don't have the pre-cut. So I always have, it's just a matter of having that extra trace line or placement line. It's going to be the same stitch and the same placement. So worst case scenario, if they say, hey, I have pre-cut, it's just deleting one color and it's there for them to use. So I always do a trace line and a cut line. So
do you also kick out a vector when you do that too, just in case?
The few people that I know that ask me for the vector, they send it. If you're asking for a vector, obviously you're cutting it beforehand, so it's definitely a red flag that they are pre-cutting if they're asking for the vector cut. But yeah, it's typically it's something that's asked, and more than not, I would say the easier route is in hoop cut, just because you're not having to do that extra step with either cutting on your own plotter or ordering the material pre-cut. So I just assume that, projects like this, it's something where they have material in house. They just want to do something with applique. They're going to cut it on the machine. But again, it's an easy fix, just deleting that one color out if they do come back and say, hey, these are pre-cut items. So
I'm just spoiled because I have a laser.
the other difference too, you got to remember, if you are doing pre-cut, you're definitely going to want to either do a material that already has some type of adhesive to it, or using some type of adhesive, a spray or something, because when you do just the trace line or the placement line, and you are trying to be accurate and place that material, especially if it's a material that's real intricately cut, you're going to want to make sure that it stays in that predetermined area. So you're going to want to adhere it down somehow before it does that tack down stitch.
Yeah. And I'm going to just grab a couple of comments here. We have Martin Campbell. So we have both Campbells in today. Cindy says, for me, single twill is a satin, and TW colors zigzag or satin. Lots of uniforms. I don't know what TW means. So enlighten me a little bit. We have Jerry Lee watching from Idaho, and Cindy. So do y'all tack down and then cut by hand after tack down? So you want, if you're going to do that, you want to have a tack down and a cut line. Because if you have your actual tack down line, and you try to cut against it, you're going to be cutting, it's going to be a little bit closer to the border, and you might have some overage. So the cut line is typically inset a little bit more than the tack down line. Correct me if I'm wrong.
So Cindy, yeah, I think she's more in the frame of mind of the uniforms, and she's either pre-cutting or ordering the pre-cut twill. You definitely don't want to, if you're doing it in the hoop cut for applique, it's not going to be a pretty edge. You're not going to want to really finish it with just a zigzag, something that's open, and you're going to see that edge of the material. I mean, unless you have a really deft hand at cutting that edge of that material, or you want that messy look, there is those looks where you kind of have those frayed edges and it's just a zigzag around the edge. Then if that's what you're looking for, but yeah, in the hoop applique, 99% of the time, it's going to be finished with a solid satin border to hide all those imperfections of that cut.
Yep. So, I'm just going to pull up Eric's comment here because it says placement, cut line, then do the cut, then tack, and then cover if I'm hand cutting.
Right.
And that's what you want to do. Candace says, I'm getting ready to do a heart on a t-shirt with quilter's cotton. I was thinking of using an iron-on no-show mesh on the back of it. Do you think that would help it not fray, or should I look at something else? So anything that you fuse to the back is going to help with the fraying. I personally, when I do it, there's a product called Applique Wonder, I think, that is made specifically to stop it from fraying. Or I use a heat pressed adhesive, kind of like what you get on regular tackle twill, not the pressure sensitive, but just regular tackle twill. I'll put that on there, but it does depend, anything that you add to that is going to add thickness to the garment. So if you're trying to do something that's going to be really light, you may just want to do a wider satin to give yourself more coverage versus trying to fuse something to it.
And one other thing too, seeing that even the settings on Wilcom, not only do you need the stops in between the steps, because the trace line stop, place your material, tack down, stop, make your cut, but even in between the tack down and the outer top layer, I always suggest putting a color change or a stop, because once it does that tack down, that's going to really give you a visual of how accurate you were with the cutting. If you know that your top satin's only, say, a millimeter or two wider than your tack down, and you see that on one corner of the material sticking out a good 3 to 4 or 5 millimeters, you need to take a break, trim that area one more time, before you do that top layer. Because once you get that top layer and that satin down, and you have that little bit of applique material sticking out, it can be really irritating and ruin your design.
Absolutely. So we'll go ahead and keep going down the list. We have Bevy Jean. Good evening. Sorry I'm late. No problem. There's always a replay if you feel like you missed something. And Cindy, so do you in the commercial setting do a lot of applique? That's a good question for you, Justin.
I don't do a lot of applique. To tell you the truth, the majority of the applique we do would be patches, applique patches. So there's been maybe 2 or 3 projects that were applique. Well, I take that back. There's one project that we do every year for an organization for the university here locally. They do these special Letterman jackets, and they're basically numbers and letters in the back of jackets. But other than that, we're not a lot. We don't do a lot of uniforms. The teams that we do are typically like vinyl numbers in the back, so there's no embroidery, included in it. But not too much in our shop.
So I do it a lot, and by a lot I mean a lot. But I also do it for the patches that I make, and I make a lot of patches. So
Right.
I have done it on a few garments, like kids' clothes is an excellent example. When you're trying to get really small into those clothes and you're worried about having a lot of embroidery up against the skin, that can help with that, because you are, you're not throwing down as many stitches. It's going to be softer and more pliable. But it definitely depends on like the look you're trying to go through too. If you have something that's super detailed that you're not going to be able to get embroidery, you might be able to get it in sublimation or screen print, right, direct to garment, and then applique that down. So it just kind of depends on every project, I guess. It's nice to know whether or not you do it in a commercial setting or at home, because it's always good to have that option in the back of your head when you get a job that comes in and you're like, you know what, I could save myself a lot of time if I did applique.
Right. And if you are solely just an embroiderer, applique is one of those things where you can add really easy to the services that you're offering, because all it is just getting material. There's not special equipment that you need. You don't have to, have a plotter to cut it. You don't have to have, like you said, screen printing or sublimation or anything like that. I mean, if you want to get into that, those are extra steps that you can take, whether you get the equipment or sub out that part of it. But just adding applique when you have the embroidery machine, it's just a matter of getting the material that you're going to use.
Yeah. And I know one of the examples, like when somebody says commercial applique to me, one of the examples that always pops into my head is one that Eric shows that he did with the peppers inside the text. That one always pops into my mind every time somebody asks me about commercial applique is that he shows on, I think he had a couple of take-up episodes on it. But Eric here says, I did a good amount for large coverage areas on jacket backs, as well as the aforementioned jersey numbers, names, and sublimated decoration. If you do jerseys or big jackets, it can be a fair amount. Candace, thanks for the answer. Absolutely. And Eric, it was really seasonal and or event based, not our core. And that kind of sounds like what it is for you too, Justin. Is
pretty much, yeah.
And Cindy, out in the retail stores, there's a lot of fun type of applique, but I think most are sewn and then later cut at the embroidery machine. There's a lot of in the hoop projects too that I see that a lot of in the hoop projects are like applique, just with more steps. So
right.
And being that we just did the applique getaway, and there was in the hoop like bags that you would make with a zipper. So a lot of that can happen inside of the hoop, but it involves more steps.
Another bonus as far as for commercial embroiderers, if they do have a multi-head, that is one way of not having to, if you have multiple colored garments, or garments are wanting, they want, this color on this garment, this color on this garment. If the element of your design is the only thing that you're changing the color for, that's something you can run on multiple heads and just use different kind of material. And you don't have to worry about changing up threads or running, one run with red, one run with blue. If the embroidery part of it is all the same, it's something you can do multi heads and still change up on individual heads just using different material. So that's another bonus to doing applique.
Yeah. So depending on the software that you have, of course, me and Justin have Willcom up today, but depending on the software that you do have, it may or may not have an applique function. And really, the functions just make it happen faster. Is really all that it is. If you have the basic, I can digitize a run stitch, I can do a column, you can do applique. Even if you don't have a zigzag, a zigzag's just a satin stitch with more density or less density, I guess. It's more open. So you can do all of these individually, one step at a time. It'll just take you longer versus if you have an applique function where you can just lay it out and it automatically adds the different stitches that you need in the sequence there. So
yeah, even if you don't have the set applique settings like Wacom has, there is also several softwares that I've seen where plotting the single run stitch and you can duplicate it and just convert that to a satin or a zigzag. So you're actually only plotting one shape, duplicating it, and just changing the type of stitch that plotted point is. So there are other shortcuts besides the predetermined settings in Wacom or any other software.
Yep. So I think before we get into the design, let's go over a couple of the important things that you need to remember when you're doing applique. The first one is that your placement line and your cut line and your tack down line all need to be inset on the inside of your satin stitch. If you're going to be covering it at the end, you want to make sure that everything's inset so that you'll be able to cover everything. Typically when I do applique, I like to have my run stitch inset from the outside of the border about 25%, and that means that my tack down and my cut line is going to make up the other 75% of the width of that satin. So I like to do that just to make sure that my placement and it's all going to be very well covered on the outside edge there, because ultimately when you're done, you just want to see, and that was not the thing I wanted to do. You just want to see the satin stitch over the top of it. You don't want to be able to see any of your placement, your run, any of your trim sticking out the outside. You want to make sure everything that is covered. So I'm going to pull up a comment here. So I had to switch to my computer. I'm running my embroidery machine. I can't hear on my phone. Speaking of applique, I'm working on some right now. Awesome. So with that, I think that pretty much covers everything as far as what you need to do applique and the different things to look at. And so I guess I can go ahead and show the design that I probably shouldn't have started working on, but I started working on anyways. So this is a little monster. He's roughly 6 inches tall. I think I sized it first. Let's find out. So yeah, he's about 6 inches tall. And the idea is that this would get put on a kid's shirt or that kind of an application. And I did use the automatic tools here that are in Willcom to go ahead and generate the applique outline. I can tell you that I'm not overly thrilled with it, mainly because I'm not happy with how these corners are done. I'm going to go, more than likely, I would change them if I was to do that. But of course, it didn't stop on any of the steps because I had it going too fast. But let's go ahead and back it up here. And as you can see, it does a placement stitch. Let's hide that. And that's, it's just a run stitch, maybe 3.5 millimeters, 2.5 millimeters stitch length. It's nothing crazy. And then on this one, I did it as a pre-cut shape. So now it's doing the tack down that is going to go around and it's going to attach that piece of fabric down to the base fabric. So I'd run this, stop. If I was going to do a cut, I'd run the cut. I'd place the fabric, then run the cut line, make the cut, stop, and then this would come down and tack it down. And then I really like what Justin said about making it stop here and ensuring that everything is trimmed inside of that satin line. That's something I've never done before. And so I really like that idea. And then, of course, it's going to go around and it's going to throw down. It's usually pretty underlay heavy. Every time I've seen a machine generated applique, it's really underlay heavy. And that's because they really want to make sure that they're grabbing all of that loose fabric and it's holding it down as much as possible. So it's going to go ahead and it's doing looks like a tatami style underlay, and then it's going to come over the top of that with a satin. And again, I'm not thrilled how those are coming. And then as far as the elements of the design, those are going to begin to sew on top of the design after the fabric is attached, so that you'll be able to see it. And of course, I didn't even get to doing outlines on the stuff. I just made it about this far, and I was like, well, it's time to start. And of course, he's armless, but arms will be added later. So Chris has a question. Is it ever possible for the fabric under the stitching to come loose or fall out over time? That, to me, depends on the quality of the fabric that you're using to applique down. The tighter the weave, the more it's going to hold up over time. But a lot of what I see when people have issues with that is they don't have enough width in the cover satin. And so immediately as it goes down, it's already starting to fray the fabric, and it comes loose when the satin comes over the top.
Yeah, I think if it's a material issue, you're going to see that right off the bat when it starts sewing the underlay and that outer border. It's going to start tearing that fabric if that fabric is that delicate. That's where you would want to use some type of backing to it to make that material a little bit more stable in order to take that stitching. But I don't see something if it sews properly and it's got the proper coverage. I don't see material, pulling away from that border after washing and whatnot.
Yeah, most of the time when I see that, it's like a t-shirt knit on top of a t-shirt knit. It's something really, open weave that it begins to fray immediately when you start to sew it down. And that's another, it's a good case for adding something fusible to the back of it to try and make sure that, you're adding stability into those stitches so that it's not going to come undone. And I know there are a couple of, and the one I think of, I think it's called Applique Magic, and it always comes to the top of my head, but I think it's made by Floriani. Ganold has that double-sided. It's called Goodie Stick, and I have some because I use it all the time. But it's basically like a double-sided embroidery tape, but you can get it in 12-inch width. So you put it on the back of the fabric, then you cut around it, and then you sew on the top of it. So that works really, really well too.
Now, one situation that might be an issue is there has over the last, I'd say 5 years or so, I know Stalls has come out with some of their vinyls. They're saying that you can use as a tearaway applique material. So you'll actually you'll lay down the piece. You don't have to pre-cut or anything. You don't even have to cut in the hoop. After it sews, you tear away the excess material. But because it is vinyl and you are pretty much perforating that inner edge, you always want to make sure that you're heat pressing that afterwards, so the vinyl does get adhered to the garment. So yeah, if you were to use a material like that, don't heat press it. That's going to eventually start tearing away from the outline.
Yeah, and I've even seen with projects like that, they'll run just like run stitch kind of a pattern over the top of it, kind of like quilting, to help hold that down. Because if it's tear away and you're tearing away the outside edge, and the outside edge tear away cleanly, that means the inside edge is going to equally tear away cleanly with just as much effort. So we have another question here from Chris. Is there ever a possibility of wrinkling of the applique fabric after a wash from shrinking or not? I think, again, that's going to move into the type of materials that you're using. That it's possible. I'll go out there and I'll just say it's possible. If you're using a tightly woven twill and you applique that down and then you heat press it to the garment, it's not going to wrinkle because you fused it to that material. If you're using, let's say you've got a poly performance shirt and you're using a 100% cotton applique fabric down on top of it and you wash it really, really hot, it might buckle. Because we are dealing with the constraints of the textiles that we pick and choose for each process, which is why a lot of the time when we see applique in the commercial area, it's twill. That's kind of the gold standard. Everybody looks at Twill, and it's always got some type of a heat applied backing to it so that it can be pressed afterwards, fuse everything down and together so that you don't have to worry about that. More in the home market, you start to see a lot of the different materials that can be, somebody will go, oh, I have this really cool print. I just picked it up from the quilt shop. I'm going to throw it down on this t-shirt. And even then, a lot of the times it's cotton on cotton. But I think a lot of the times when I've seen applique, I don't think I've ever seen an applique buckle before the shirt has worn out.
Right.
So, all right. Well, I'm going to crack my knuckles, and Justin's going to throw something at me for, I don't know, just for the fun of it. And I'll go ahead and talk about digitizing this, and I'm just going to delete that. That had all the applique stops in it. I need to make sure that because I have all of these elements highlighted, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to hide them so that we don't have to look at them. But I do want to make sure that after anything I digitize, it's going to be for a placement, a tack down, cut line. They all need to be at the front of the embroidery so that all of this runs on top of it, because it'd be really sad if I put this on my machine and it ran all of these elements and then it did my placement stitch and I threw my fabric down on top of the already embroidered stuff. That would be what I would call an oopsie. So
the only thing you could do is you could do the arms, since the arms are kind of behind the body. If you really wanted to, you could do the arms first. But yeah, there's always, since you have that nice satin border at the end, there's always tucking in elements that you can do underneath that satin, so it looks like it's behind the material.
Yep. And when I looked at these arms, the first thing I thought is that I'd actually pull them up a little higher, so go over the satin with them, so that they didn't sit behind him, but they were now kind of on the front side of his body. And that was mainly because I wanted to get the applique down and then do embroidery versus doing the embroidery and then putting the applique down. I guess you can do it either way.
99% of the time, that's what you do, is always the applique material first.
Yeah, there's always that. Isn't that the great thing about embroidery? There's rules, and there's almost always an exception to that rule.
Right. Especially the only time I really think of is that it happens a lot is if you're doing multi-layered applique, because you may be doing, like a sports team, the bottom layer with an outline, and there might be an element that you sew within that part of the design. Then you're going to come back on top of it and do another layer of material. Then you'd be doing kind of back and forth between the applique and the embroidery.
Yeah. So I'm going to grab an outline tool. This is the closed fill, but I'm going to turn it into an outline when I'm done here. And I'm just going to start, going around the body. And it's not super exciting to watch me draw nodes, but I can. And if you guys do have questions, feel free to ask them, and we'll make sure that we can get them covered.
I'll grab them.
Right now, I'm just working on a placement kit. So luckily, because of the nature of this embroidery, I don't have to go exactly through the art because we're the ones that do the art. I know a lot of times I see people, they really stress, they get zoomed in 5,000%, and they get stressed because it doesn't line up exactly. The width of the thread hides a lot. So I'm going to hit the right tool, and of course it's supposed to be pattern. But I'm just going to turn it to a run stitch outline, and that's essentially going to be my my placement stitch. There's not a lot to it. It's 2.5 millimeters thick length, and it just goes around, and its sole point is to say put the fabric here, and I can literally just duplicate it and change the color. And so now there's a color stop in there, and I have my placement, and then that can be my cut line where I'm going to go and I'm going to trim to make sure that everything's going to work. And finally, I'm going to duplicate that line once again, and let me change my start and my stop point. So before I go too far, I like to start and stop my applique at the very top of the project. And that is because when your machine stops, if you don't have a frame out option where it kicks the frame out, when your machine stops for you to do this, if you have your start and your stop point up here at the top, the machine's going to stop at the top, and you're going to have the majority of everything looking at you on this side of the hoop Versus if I put it on this side and the machine stops, now I have to try and get under the sewing head to be able to lay things down, and it makes things a little bit harder. So we'll go ahead and set the start and stop point for the first one, and we'll do again for the second one. And finally, this third, I'm going to convert it to a zigzag, and I'm going to come in here and I'm going to take out the underlay because I don't want any underlay, and I'm going to move my start my stop points up here to the top. And I want to make sure that this is inset a little bit. Right now, it runs out all the way. In my tool here, I can offset it a little bit, and I can actually bring it in a little bit. And I'm just going to kind of measure. Let's turn it back to metric. And I want to make sure that I'm leaving myself a good millimeter. Let's offset that just a smidge. So we're covering about there. So that as this runs, it's going to grab onto the fabric. It's going to lock it down on the inside. And I know that if I'm going to have something poke out, now's the time, like Justin said. I really like that you did that, Justin, that you stop after this color and you make sure that it's all going to be on the inside there. And we'll turn that to, let's call it this color for now. And that's going to be the tack down stitch that's going to hold down the fabric. So right now we've got the placement, we've got the cut line, and we've got the tack down. And now it kind of comes into, well, we're just going to do a satin. And because I wasn't happy with how the satin bordered, I'm going to do it with the different tool. And I'm going to throw this out. Because this is larger, I'm going to throw it out to a 5mm satin. And I'm just going to come right down this edge here. I need to make sure that I leave a little bit more room on the outside edge than I do on the inside edge, because the outside edge is where your cut is going to be, and you want to make sure that you're covering your cut. The inside edge is, boy, my computer got really slow there for a second. It's still kind of slow. And I'll come to about right here, and I'll hit enter a few times. Justin, I broke it. Oh, there it goes. I was like, man, this isn't ever going to come. So now I'll just come in here and I'll kind of cap it off just a little bit. Like so. And then I'll come back out this side here. So are you planning on cutting your fabric with the laser so you'll have pre-cut fabric? In this example, this is made, I'm adding the cut line in here so that I can cut into. But I'll be honest with you, when I do it, and I think it's just because I have one. I cut all my applique fabric on a laser. Even for sewing projects, I cut it on the laser just because it is so much more precise. You could do the same on a plotter, I guess. Like a Cricut with a mat, Cricut circuit. Or if you were really fancy and had an aisle line cutter. I don't have one of those, Justin. I'd really like it. But what do you guys use to cut your? Do you cut it all in the hoop, Justin, or do you guys have a plotter?
We have a plotter, but like I said, the amount of applique we do, we don't really get into pre-cut. We just do it in the hoop.
Yeah, that's kind of it. It all depends on how much you're doing. If you're doing a lot, then it's nice to have it in the hoop, or,
right?
You know, pre-cut. If you're not doing a lot, then sometimes it's just faster to have that. We'll just cover it like this here. And that is essentially the outside edge. I got to fix some things here, Justin. You should throw popcorn at me for not. Just to make sure everything covers everything. And I'll come over here and I'll bump this out just a smidge. Bring that out. And of course, this one needs to come a little bit longer. And there you go. We've appliqued. Super easy. Did I bring this comment up? Maybe I didn't. So you're all planning to cut your fabric with your laser, so you will have pre-cut fabric. Yeah, I cut it on my laser. Before I did that, I used to just do a run stitch onto manila folders. You know, I would just do a run stitch on those on some like tearaway stabilizer. And then I'd take that out and I'd cut along the needle holes, and then I'd use that as a template to cut my fabric with a pair of scissors, so that I didn't have to do that.
Another trick too is if if it is a shape where you can sew just that cut line uh, many times within a hoop, you can go ahead and just sew that line in the material itself, pre-cut just by cutting out on that line. Same thing, kind of use it as your template, and you use that as a cut line. You don't have to have a plotter. You don't have to have a laser. If you are wanting to do pre-cut in-house, that's another quick way. You either do the template like you said, where you actually use something like the manila folder to draw on your material and cut out, or you can do that running stitch cut line, cut around that edge. Doesn't matter if that little bit of stitch is falling off or staying on there, it's going to get covered anyways.
Yeah, it just depends on how many you have to do. If you're doing 2, you may as well cut them out in the hoop. If you're doing 200, you might want to get them pre-cut.
Right.
A little bit, save you some time. Candace asks, what's that cool thing I've seen used to cut in Detour's videos? So Luis has a hot air cutter that goes on his machine that does some fancy stuff, and it cuts the fabric. I think it's really cool too. But that's what he uses on his machine. I don't know if he uses it all the time, but I've seen some cool videos with it. Cindy says, I think of applique as one-piece items unless it's a baseball team, which a lot of those have gone to sublimation. Mm-hmm. I could see them going to sublimation. But like Greek letters on sweatshirts, that kind of stuff, I see a lot of applique with that. Chanel patches are technically applique on. So it depends on the use that you're going for. So Barb says, I've used both my scan and cut and Cricut to pre-cut my applique pieces. Yeah, I don't use my Cricut that often because I got a laser, but I have in the past. Eric says, I've also seen someone stitch like that without thread and use chalk to prick and bounce. I know what you're talking about. And you can chalk through the holes of the pattern and make a line on the fabric cut. That's actually pretty clever. I never thought of that, but I know exactly what he's talking about. That said, I would apply a carrier and cut on my standard blade plotter to have the fabric cut. And you can do that too on, because I think the pressure sensitive adhesive that Stahl sells, it's already on a carrier sheet. So a lot of people just throw those in vinyl cutters and cut with them.
Right. Yeah. Otherwise, yeah, if you don't get the pressure sensitive, the time that I did try the plotter, you actually have to buy the carrier, put your material on the carrier in order to cut it, which you're going to take it off the carrier. So yeah, it adds some steps. It's just a matter of where you want to put in the time to do the process. You want, on the machine to be as quick as possible. You're just throwing on a pre-cut and letting the machine do its thing, but you're going to be cutting and everything else or ordering pre-cut beforehand. It's just a matter of where you want to put your time in.
Yep, and just for that reason, there are companies that they'll send you pre-cut letters because you're ordering the twill from them anyways. They'll cut it and send it to you. And then all you have to do is put it on your machine and run it. I know Stahl's, they'll even sell you the stitch files for the pre-cut that you can use.
Especially when you are getting into teams and you're doing numbers and names. I mean, having all that pre-cut when you're doing individual stuff, that's definitely the way to go. And I know they do actually packages where you can buy the whole alphabet or the whole 8-inch number or 6-inch number. So you have everything pre-done, preset, pre-digitized, and it's definitely the way to go when you have projects like that.
Yeah. So Cindy says, I've learned through the home embroidery the term fussy cut. Fun word. I would agree. It's a fun word, but I don't know what it means. I feel pretty inadequate on my knowledge of terms today. Eric says, yep, pressure sensitive poly twill is good on its own. Otherwise, you have to have Magic Mask or other carriers. It's a pain, but for some precise shapes, it was a better choice.
That is definitely a good point to have something pre-cut if it is a shape where it's not just really broad strokes or easy corners to turn into something that's really, really intricate with little corners and crevices that you have to get into. Trying to do that in the hoop, that can be a pain. Sometimes you're in there with your trimming scissors trying to get that little bit to make sure that it's not sticking out of the outline. So that is definitely a bonus to pre-cutting beforehand, so you're not trying to get those small little areas in the hoop.
Yeah, and they even, I don't have a pair, but they have applique scissors that are made to make it easier to cut inside of the hoop. I don't have any, But
again, on broad and easy shapes that are, you know, circles or squares or something that's really basic, they do help a lot. It's got that flat side, so you can actually put it against your material and just kind of run it, you know, horizontally to your material, or perpendicular, or not perpendicular, but it lays across your material as you're cutting. But those scissors, when you do have those tight corners in these little areas, no, they're not easy.
yeah, and I mean, you pretty much lose all your time savings if you're going to be
Right.
sitting there trying to trim out all the little tiny
Right.
places. You
Right.
may as well just throw in a full fill on it, because you just lost that time savings. So Barb says, Cindy, I have a clear plastic templates for my fussy cutting, also clear filters ruler that are great for fussy cutting. And Cindy's going to tell me what that means. Fussy cut, have a pattern laid a certain way for a design. Pattern land. Okay. Oh, I think I know what you mean. So like if it's plaid, you want to make sure it's lined up. At least I'm going with that. That's what we're running with. But back to our little guy here. Now that we have him outlined, we go ahead and look at his appendages. So I would just do, of course, I would just do each hand individually. So I just had to make sure it was on the right tool. And I'm just going to go all the way back to there. We'll jump over here and do this hand. And then I'm going to bump it out a little bit, because it should be bumped out a little bit. Come in just a little bit more to there. And then we'll come down the center. And I will go ahead and bring it all the way over. And I'll come in just a little bit more. And I'm going to fix that, because that's going to drive me absolutely up the wall. Justin's already cringing on it. There we go. Drag it that way just a little bit. And I'll be happy with that. For now, at least. I wonder if I could get away with this. What do you think? Will it mirror? No, it won't. Maybe if I rotate it.
Rotate it.
Not that much.
Rotate it, skew it.
Hey,
the top.
Now you've learned my style of embroidery. Let's rotate it and skew it and rotate it. Yeah, that doesn't work, does it? And this might actually, you know, it might be wise to throw down one hand underneath and one hand over.
Yeah.
If we're going to talk about things that might be smart to do, we'll just exempt me from a lot of those.
And you could always, if you really wanted to, make sure that those hands are tucked up underneath. You can sew the hands while it's doing that outline. So when it's doing that top stitch, satin stitch on the applique border, you can incorporate doing the hands where that arm's going to come up underneath that top stitch. You know, sew first and then have that top stitch come back over it.
And we'll bring this up a little bit higher to like right there. And we'll grab those three. And like you said, we can just move it up in the sewing order. And of course, let's grab all of it and we'll pull it out a little bit more. There. So now we get that kind of I'm turned look. That's what we were going for. At least I'm going to say. All right. So
some depth there, Jeff.
I know I'm known for my flat, unsightly, untextured embroidery. I know, but I'm going to
keep it flat
out just a little bit, and I'm going to add about that much texture, and that's it. The rest of it's flat.
Yeah.
That's Justin thinking I'm going to throw something at Jeff later. So next up, of course, I would do the eye. And again, this is, you know, we want to work on our objects moving from the back to the front. So in this case, it would be I would do a fill for the white area of the eye. and I'd probably do a mild outline. And by mild, I mean more than that. And come around there and end up here at the top. And of course, that is also going to be white. It would help if I changed all these things before I started, but we don't do that all the time. So next up would be the eye. Let's go ahead and measure it. We're at 7 millimeters, give or take. So we could do that as a satin. And in fact, I'm going to, and I'll come up again just a little bit there. And there we go. And in here. And we do have an excellent comment here. There we go. It took me a hot minute to get the right key combination. But Jerry Lee says you must mean a non-dimensional border. Yep. Non-dimensional. Oh, and we'll go ahead and again do a fill here for the eye. And I'm going to end there. And we'll just let it come back that way. And we'll do that. And I think that's the darker blue. Now, one of the things that I want to make sure here is I want to look at my fill angles. I prefer to go around 15, anywhere from 15 to 30 degrees. I'm not huge at 60 degrees. You definitely don't want to go 45 degrees because that's generally on the bias of the material. 165. So I'm going to make sure that these two fills are at opposing angles so that they don't sink in together and kind of blend. And I will go ahead and just copy and paste that. And I will do a dimensionless border around that too. And I want to offset that a little bit more to the inside. So we'll go like 70% there. And because my artwork is just slightly skewed, I do want to bump it out here just a little bit so that it's not overlapping onto that border. So there we go. You have at least an eye. I don't know, Justin, you have anything you want to add in here? Anything you do different?
No. I would be doing it just the same as you.
I feel like I'm doing a good job now. So looking at the mouth here, I'm probably not going to do that black line. If I did, I would do it right across the top. I'll go ahead and do the teeth. Looking at the eye up here versus the teeth, I can already tell that they're smaller than 7 millimeters. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that down here. I'm going to make sure I'm on a satin. And I'm actually going to change the color so I don't have to change the color later. And this is a perfect candidate for this one tool that I hear is really awesome.
Your favorite tool.
I heard the other day that, it might actually have a purpose. I don't remember who told me that, but
I don't know.
Come over to the dark side. We're using column B.
I don't know who would have admitted that.
And there we go. Now we have the mouth or the teeth. I could do the teeth vertically this way and then run in between them. I opted not because I do want to throw a black satin right here and indicate that upper line of the mouth. Let's go ahead and pull that here. And I could go in and taper it if I really wanted to. Let's drop that down to 1.2 millimeters wide. And there. So let's see here. I think that's Matt because it's not me, and I don't know if it's you. It's probably you. So if it's not me and it's not you, it's definitely Matt. And Eric says, haha, column B. I knew it. Absolutely. Oh, maybe it's Jerry Lee. I think Jerry Lee's hiding in the wings. I just now picked up on that. So there we go. It's Jerry Lee. And now we have the mouth. And then it's just as simple as coming, down here and viewing the borders, which I could do as a circular tool. And Again, I probably should have changed my color. Let's go a little bit longer that way just because we can. This one will go there, and we'll do it like that. This one will go there, and we'll go about like that. And then we got our black spots here. So our dark blue, like that, and we'll call these light blue. And essentially, there we go. Of course, it would be test sew, make sure it works, and then I would use it on my project. So that is applique in a nutshell, I would say. That's how I would do it. I don't know if you have anything you want to throw on top there, Justin, that I did wrong, because I'm good at that sometimes.
No, I think we covered the gist of applique with this little project.
I would hope so. If not, you can let us know in the comments. You can always ask in the Embroidery Nerd group. If you are in the group. If you aren't in the group, please go ahead and head over to the group. When you request to join, make sure that you answer all of the questions. We do use those questions to screen, and you have to answer all of them. Even if they are redundant, make sure you answer all the questions, and we can go ahead and get that improved and let you in. Justin with his branding, nice. EMB Nerd Tumblr. I'm trying to think of anything else other than come join the group. It's kind of been crazy because I feel like we don't have a lot of announcements. It was 2 weeks ago that we did your text class, right?
Correct.
So
ABCs of lettering and text and embroidery.
Yep, and that was a very good class. For those of you that didn't attend it, you can always purchase the replay and you can check it out. Ask questions in the group if you have them. But it was a lot of content and it was really in depth and it was really good. So I highly recommend that. Jerry Lee is telling us that last week we got an award. We did actually. Me and Justin got a Reggie Award for the best guest on the Two Regular Guys podcast.
Yes, we did.
So that was really exciting. And other than that, the only thing I can think of that is coming up. Oh, we got the Text Talk webinars. We're on fire today. I think it's Jerry Lee in the background. She's doing it.
I posted that link.
Oh, okay. Justin's on fire. So other than that, there's the Long Beach show coming up here pretty soon. Then after that, there's DAX in Kansas City in February. And I don't think that we have anything else coming up that I'm aware of, unless if you know something else. But that's all that I have on Applique. If you have questions, make sure that you ask them, and we'll do our best to get them answered. See you in Long Beach. There you go. So with that, Justin, if you don't have anything else you want to announce or throw in there.
If for any reason we don't see you guys before Christmas, we wish everybody a very Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays.
Absolutely. So with that, I am Jeff Fuller from Fuller Embroidery Works. That is Justin Armenta from JA Digitizing Studios, and we were both here for the Embroidery Nerd. We'd like to thank you guys for hanging out with us.
Good night, guys.